The city moved in predictable rhythms. The black SUVs, the security detail, the carefully mapped-out schedule. Everything was set to ensure control, predictability, stability. For as long as Barron Trump could remember, every step of his life had been orchestrated, every destination decided before he even stepped out the door. But today, something inside him shifted. Today, he would make his own decision. As the convoy of vehicles lined up outside Trump Tower, the men in black suits moved with precision, every movement rehearsed, every scenario accounted for. The security team was used to following a plan. What they weren't prepared for was change. Barron stood in the lobby, adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit. His expression unreadable, his presence unmistakable. He glanced at his phone one last time, then locked the screen. His mind was set. Carter, the head of his detail, approached. "All set, sir?" Barron exhaled, his voice calm but firm. "No, we're changing plans." Carter's brows furrowed. "Sir, we have a secured schedule. Any last-minute change, we're going somewhere else." A brief silence. The security team exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't standard. Barron had never been difficult. He understood the necessity of their structure. But today, his stance was different. A quiet authority radiated from him, something no one in the room had ever seen before. Carter sighed, pressing his earpiece. "All right, where to?" Barron's answer was simple, direct, unshakable. "Take me to the homeless shelter on 9th Street." The words hit the room like a sudden shift in gravity. The air felt heavier. Carter blinked, uncertain if he had misheard. "Sir?" Barron met his gaze without hesitation. "You heard me." The hesitation in the room was brief, but palpable. This wasn't a PR stop. It wasn't an event designed for cameras and applause. It was a choice, a deliberate, unscripted decision. Carter studied him for a moment longer, then nodded reluctantly, signaling to the others. For the first time in his life, Barron Trump wasn't just following the path set before him. He was creating his own. And no one, not even the men assigned to protect him, knew what to expect next. The engines rumbled as the convoy moved through the streets of New York. Inside the lead SUV, Carter sat in silence, his jaw tight, fingers tapping rhythmically against the armrest. He had been doing this job for years, protecting high-profile figures, securing locations before they arrived, eliminating risks before they became threats. But this was different. Barron sat beside him, his expression unreadable, his gaze fixed on the passing cityscape. He had heard the hesitation in Carter's voice, seen the tension in the security team's movements. He knew they didn't approve. But for once, their approval didn't matter. Carter cleared his throat. "Sir, I don't mean to question your decision, but I need to understand. Why the sudden change?" Barron didn't look away from the window. "It's not sudden," he said. "I've been thinking about it for a while." Carter exhaled sharply. "You understand this isn't a controlled environment. No pre-screening, no secured perimeter. We don't know who's inside that shelter." "I know," Barron said simply. Carter studied him, trying to read the shift in his demeanor. This wasn't the quiet, compliant Barron Trump he had spent years protecting. There was something different in his posture, his voice, a quiet defiance, a certainty that couldn't be shaken. "You're the son of a former president," Carter pressed. "Anywhere you go, you make news. If something happens..." Barron finally turned to face him. "And if I don't go? If I keep living in a world that's pre-approved and scripted, then what?" Carter had no answer. The SUVs slowed as they neared the shelter. It wasn't much to look at, a worn-out brick building wedged between two larger complexes. The kind of place people walked past without a second thought. The kind of place Barron had never been allowed to see up close. As the cars rolled to, "A stop," Carter muttered something into his earpiece. "Keep eyes on all exits. Stay close." The doors unlocked. The security team moved first, scanning the area, their hands hovering near their concealed weapons. But Barron didn't wait for their approval. He stepped out onto the sidewalk, into a world completely different from his own. For the first time, there were no cameras, no staged handshakes, no polished speeches, just reality, and for once he was ready to face it. The air outside was different. It smelled of damp pavement and exhaustion, of coffee brewed too long and conversations, whispered in hushed tones. The sidewalk in front of the shelter was cracked, uneven, littered with stories no one had ever stopped to listen to. Barron stood still for a moment, taking it all in, feeling the weight of what he was about to walk into. Carter was at Ma, his side in an instant, voice low, clipped. "Sir, I strongly advise you to keep this brief. Get in, get out. No unnecessary interactions." Barron didn't answer. He was already moving. The people outside the shelter turned to look, some pausing mid-step, others pulling their coats tighter, as if unsure what they were witnessing. A few recognized him immediately. Others simply saw another well-dressed young man who didn't belong. An older man sitting on the curb, his beard streaked with gray, squinted up at him. "Ain't this something?" he muttered under his breath. "Trump's kid. What's he doing here?" Barron stopped, meeting the man's eyes. "I came to listen." The man let out a short laugh, dry and humorless. "That's so?" He shook his head, looking away. "Rich folks don't come here to listen. They come here to feel better about themselves." Barron crouched down slightly, lowering himself to the man's level. "I don't need to feel better about myself," he said quietly. "I need to understand." The man's eyes flickered with something unreadable. He studied Barron for a moment before exhaling sharply, motioning toward the door with a slight nod. "Go on then, kid. See if you still want to understand once you're inside." Barron straightened, turning toward the shelter's entrance. His security team tensed behind him, their movements sharp, controlled. But Barron wasn't concerned about them. He wasn't concerned about the cameras that would eventually find this moment, or the headlines that would twist his intentions into whatever narrative fit best. He stepped through the heavy doors into the warmth of the shelter's dimly lit interior. The room was filled with people, some sitting at worn wooden tables, some waiting in line for food, others simply existing in a space that asked nothing of them. Conversations quieted as they noticed him. No one moved. No one welcomed him. For the first time in his life, Barron Trump was somewhere he wasn't expected, and now he had to prove he deserved to be there. The murmurs spread slowly, a ripple of curiosity and suspicion moving through the room. A few people exchanged glances, unsure whether to acknowledge his presence or pretend he wasn't there. Others just stared, arms crossed, waiting to see what he would do. Near the front desk, a woman with tired eyes and a clipboard tucked under her arm stepped forward. She wasn't intimidated by the security team or impressed by the unannounced visit. She had seen too many people walk through these doors, some with good intentions, some with none at all. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone neutral but firm. Barron met her gaze. "I was hoping to talk." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "To who?" Barron glanced around the room. "Anyone willing." A scoff came from the far side of the room. A man sitting near the corner, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, let out a dry laugh. "You want to talk? Why? Someone send you in here? To do a story? Get some good PR?" Barron turned toward the voice. "No," he said simply. "I just want to listen." The man shook his head, leaning back in his chair. "Rich kid wants to listen. That's a new one." Barron took a step closer. Maybe it should happen more often. A few people chuckled, but there was no warmth to it. Just skepticism, earned from years of being overlooked and unheard. The woman with the clipboard sighed, rubbing her temples. "Look, I don't have time for whatever this is. If you're here to make a donation, you can—" "I'm not here for that," Barron interrupted, his voice steady but calm. "I don't want to write a check. I want to understand. I want to know what this place needs, what you need." The man with the coffee raised an eyebrow. "And why's that?" Barron didn't hesitate. "Because I've spent my whole life being told what I should care about. Maybe it's time I decide for myself." The room fell quiet again. The skepticism wasn't gone. Not yet. But something shifted. A challenge had been placed on the table, and now it was up to them to decide if they wanted to take it. The woman studied him for a moment longer, then finally sighed. "All right," she said. "If you really want to know, take a seat." Barron nodded, and just like that, the conversation he had come for had begun. Barron pulled out a chair, the legs scraping against the worn linoleum floor. His security detail tensed, their eyes scanning the room, their hands hovering near their concealed weapons. But Barron wasn't concerned about them. He wasn't thinking about the logistics of safety or the optics of this moment. He was focused on the people in front of him, the ones who had spent years being ignored, overlooked, forgotten. He rested his hands on the table, fingers interlocked, and looked around. The man with the coffee, now watching him with a mix of curiosity and skepticism, leaned forward. "All right, kid, you want to listen? Start with this. What do you think this place needs?" Barron exhaled, choosing his words carefully. "I could guess. More funding, better resources, stronger support networks. But that's not why I'm here. I don't want to assume. I want to hear it from you." The man nodded slowly, as if testing him. "Fair enough." He gestured around the room. "You see these people? They don't need another speech about broken systems. They don't need promises from someone who will disappear in a week. They need jobs. They need housing. They need someone to stop pretending like shelters are the solution when they're just a bandage on a deeper wound." Barron nodded. "So, what's the real solution?" A woman across the table, wearing a jacket 2 sizes too big for her frame, scoffed. "There isn't one. People like you don't fix problems like this. You throw money at them and call it charity." Barron met her gaze. "And what if I don't?" Silence. She studied him, waiting for the catch. "Then what are you here to do?" He leaned in slightly. "To build something that lasts." The man with the coffee narrowed his eyes. "And what does that mean?" Barron reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. He flattened it on the table, revealing sketches, calculations, plans for something bigger than just a shelter, a community. A space designed not just to house people, but to give them skills, opportunities, dignity. He tapped the paper lightly. "I don't want to donate to a cause. I want to change the way we look at this entirely." The room was still, the weight of his words hanging in the air. For the first time, skepticism was replaced by something else, something that felt dangerously close to hope.